Hey Rob, how's it going?
Rajiv, good to see you as always.
Yeah, wonderful to see you as well. Thanks for taking a few minutes. There's
Of
so
course.
much to talk about. I almost don't even know where to start. But well, I guess we'll start with the last time we hung out, which was at Startup Weekend.
Yeah.
That was a blast, and thank you again for making time to be one of the judges on Startup Weekend. It's always a blast. But how was that event for you? What do you think?
Well, as you know, I loved it. I think it's what the at least the second, maybe the third time that I've I've judged it. And I always leave those things just feeling excited, inspired, right? Because you and I've had this conversation so many times over the years, the different things that we're both separately and collectively involved in. But so much of what I'm passionate about, what I try to do is supporting entrepreneurs and helping them grow and helping them scale. And to me, Startup Weekend is so unique because some of them come in with an idea, right? And they have to convince others to try to join them on their idea. But a lot of them are really just there for the process and the effort, and the team they thought they were going to be on isn't on. And yet by the end of the weekend, some of them, they've got a business. And it was amazing to me how many of them were able to articulate them in several days. So to me, it's just another reminder of the creativity of entrepreneurs, the power of entrepreneurs, the passion of the entrepreneurs. So many of them were not just building businesses, but trying to solve real problems, largely in our community here in Central Florida, which to me, I think entrepreneurial thinking is a big part of trying to solve systemic problems. So I just left feeling great. Uh, Plus, we also had EDC in Orlando that weekend, so it made for some of the surrounding crowd in downtown interesting as I was walking back and forth from the parking garage. But thank you
Yeah,
for letting me do that. I just love to do that.
absolutely. Yeah, we were a little worried about the parking situation, but it ended up all
No, it's
working
fine.
working out fine.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. No,
yeah.
like you were
I
saying,
mean,
I
other
mean,
than other than the motorcycle blaring outside when you were trying to run the program, but
well, you gotta bob and weave with events. Live events are
sure.
always you never
Yeah,
know what you're gonna get. But yeah,
yeah,
we had
yeah.
a great time, and like you said, we were talking about it earlier that working with entrepreneurs is just so rewarding, and you and I both share the same why in that sense because
Yeah.
you can only make so much impact as an individual, but if you're helping other entrepreneurs take their ideas forward, the impact is kind of multiplied by the impact that these entrepreneurs go out and do in the world too. So it's very satisfying to see successful mentees go out and make a difference. So yeah,
Yeah.
couldn't,
And listen,
couldn't
I'm fortunate enough to, I would always say part of the reason I'm fortunate enough to be where I am right now is I had people who were mentoring me throughout the process, right? And guiding me. So, if I can return that favor, that's well, I certainly think that's partially what we're here for. And is also very rewarding. So I'm always glad to do that. So thank you for asking me to participate.
absolutely. Well, I got right into it, but maybe we should zoom out for a second and just let's introduce you. I mean, pretty much everybody in Orlando knows you already. You ran for mayor. You do a bunch of things. There's so many
Well,
things.
not enough people knew that. So or knew who I was then, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people know you, but just for the folks who have not, who don't know you yet,
Yeah.
let's start with a little bit of introduction. I know you do a lot of things. You're involved with UCF. You've launched the Govo Ventures, and you've got Rally that you've co-founded, and you've been leading for the last decade or so. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's probably things I don't even know about, so I'll let you kick us off and kind of share some background into where you are.
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah. So I've lived in Orlando since the early 90s. I grew up in New York City, but my wife and I moved here a couple of years after we got married. I like to tease people a little bit that I figured out some things about migrating from the Northeast to Florida a little bit earlier than a bunch of other folks. And, certainly it's been one of the greatest life decisions I've ever made in so many ways. I would sort of put my career here, my life here in well, the business side about from two different parts. The first part of it, I was part of the founding team of a really interesting entrepreneurial journey that almost needs a half hour to explain because when I give the starting point and the ending point, it always sounds very weird. But when I first joined, we were an audio cassette manufacturer making books on tape in Winter Garden, Florida, before downtown Winter Garden was redone. So when it was really just kind of a dying, agriculture town, and that was in 1996. In By the time we sold all of it to Optum, which is part of United Healthcare in 2011. So what, 15 years later, we were actually helping drive uh, probably more under 65 and over 65 individual insurance policies enrollments via the web and through licensed agent call centers than anyone in the country on behalf of health plans. There were six pivots in there that all made sense at the time. So how we ended up and where we started, again, to me, make perfect sense because I was there. But when I tell people the two things, they get a little, it doesn't make sense to them. But so we sold it in 2011. I stayed till 2013. And by that time, I was pretty involved in the community and really both from a business standpoint and also frankly just from a life standpoint. Both my daughters were entering their teenage years. I could sort of see the writing on the wall that there was a good chance I was going to lose them to colleges someplace else. They weren't going to be local, and I'd spent a lot of time on planes. Our client base was national, and so I wanted to be home. So between really wanting to get involved even more in the community and being home with the family, I kind of semi-retired, I guess. Or I just more rather than going into another operating company, I focused my effort more on investing, mentorship, working inside of the ecosystem. At that time there were a lot of us who were trying to build the ecosystem. So, I was part of that group of a lot of interested people who were really trying to take us to another level. And I'm sure we'll move on to this. You were part of that crowd as well, of course. And I think we're starting to bear some fruit here, which is exciting to see. So, as you said, I helped start the Rally Social Enterprise Accelerator back in 2017. That you've been a supporter of day one. I have a part-time role at the University of Central Florida, helping to run our business incubator. I've been doing that since 2019. Yes, I ran for county mayor in 2018. And a lot of what I talked about was entrepreneurship and education and jobs and the ability to really transform our economy. And how do we create more high wage jobs in what still is largely a tourist community, which is creates so many wonderful opportunities for our community, but also does create some challenges. And then after the kids were both at college. They did both leave as I had thought they might. After COVID, I decided to sort of get back into something a little more full time, and that's when we launched with some partners of mine. We launched Govo Venture Partners in 2000, the end of 22, the beginning of 23, and we're an early stage fund, seed to Series A, that invests in companies that are either in government regulated industries or who sell to the government. A lot of that overlays really well with where Florida's innovation economy is going. So we try to invest as much as we can in Florida-based companies. I'm actually really proud of the fact that we've made 12 investments and 9 of them are in Florida. So we've been putting money to work inside of our state. So that's been exciting and rewarding to do as well. But
Yeah, no, obviously that's a lot of things that are going on in parallel right now. Speaking of Go, I mean, when did you say that was launched? 2, 3 years ago?
yeah, so we actually started conversations about it in late 2021. One of my partners, but one of my partners, Jonathan Kilman, lives out of Miami, had been in Orlando for a long time. He and I actually met. We were on the founding board of Canvas together,
Oh, okay.
which then became part of Starter Studio, it merged with Starter Studio. And he's a lawyer and a government affairs professional. He had been the head lobbyist for Foley and Lardner for a while and then started his own firm. And we had most of his work had always been with innovative technology companies trying to get to market. So ride sharing, telemedicine, a lot of different mobility tech. And he and I had always had this rather interesting philosophical conversation about the challenges of early stage entrepreneurs trying to navigate government. And frankly, even from his perspective, that he was creating enormous value for these companies, but not necessarily unlocking the value for himself, right? He was getting paid awfully well, but not participating in the upside. And he and I had run a business together during COVID where we were helping disruptive technologies and products get to market during COVID. And in many cases, the client was government. Um, and so, that business kind of went up and down as COVID went up and down.
Was this the consulting thing that you were doing for a while?
Yeah, we were basically helping companies get distribution to market. Violet Defense, which is a company that's no longer in existence, but one that was well known here in Orlando, was one of our clients. It was interesting. We had wondered whether behavior would change around disinfection, purification, safer, cleaner spaces. And frankly, it doesn't seem like all that much has quite changed. So a lot of those businesses kind of rode up and then rode down. But it became an interesting test bed for government as a headwind and a tailwind for innovation. And so out of that, after that, Jonathan and I both said, it's we should take this concept and put it more into a fund. We had actually taken equity positions and made some investments in some of the companies that we were working with. So we started Govo right after that. Another partner of ours, Brian D'Ambrosio, who Jonathan had done some work with, who's a healthcare guy like me by background, joined the group. And then we also partnered with 1858 Capital, which is a mid-market investment banking firm here in Winter Park that I'm involved with a lot of great community and business leaders throughout the state of Florida. So we started at the end of 2021. We closed at the end of the end of 2022, beginning of 2023. So we've been deploying capital since the beginning of 2023. And again, just about 3 years have made 12 investments, and we will probably launch our second fund sometime next year, because we're getting close to being fairly deployed on this first fund. And it's an interesting time to work with governments at all, state, local, and federal level, because I do think, and again, I make no political statement here whether this is good or bad, and it really doesn't matter whether it's Democrats or Republicans. They have different issues they focus on, but there is no doubt that government is increasingly involved with the innovation engines of our economy. And also, I think one of the things COVID revealed was, to some extent, just how antiquated a lot of GovTech was. The example I always use is how quickly the unemployment system in the state of Florida, that software crashed after the PPP program. Right? It just wasn't, a lot of those systems were designed a long time ago. And so there's an interesting, it's also an interesting time. AI is now only exacerbating that and accelerating it as governments think about how they want to incorporate AI. So it's an interesting time to work with governments, both in terms of what regulatory role they're playing in some of these industries, but also the real need and frankly desire to begin to modernize technology to provide services better to their constituents, or save money, or drive more benefits. So
Gotcha. And when you say government, are you more focused on like federal government or state, local?
in our case, it really doesn't matter. I mean, we have GovTechs that are working with small cities and counties, and then we have others that are working on federal procurement contracts. So honestly, the issue is the same regardless, right?
Yeah.
It's just a matter of scale and industry. It is also an interesting time, though. There is a lot of connectivity between Florida and Washington right now,
Right.
in the current administration.
Yep.
And so that, for a fund like ours, that sort of come from Florida, comes from a political and government background in Florida, particularly with Jonathan and myself, it does create an interesting point in time. So we are. So I say that to say, yes, we're working with all levels of government for sure.
Gotcha. Well, you kind of put it very diplomatically there in terms of headwinds and tailwinds from government, because you would think one of your theses, maybe I'm just projecting here, but if I was thinking government, GovTech and stuff like that in 2021 is very different than what it is today.
Yeah.
And you would have thought that government contracts would be stable. Once you're in, you're in. Once you've proven validation, you're set. But with the kind of whiplash of administrations changing and perspectives changing, and things that were secure are no longer secure, and you got Doge and everything else going on, and where secure contracts are no longer secure anymore.
Yeah.
That has that affected your thesis at all?
Well, it doesn't affect the thesis because you kind of walk into a thesis of that knowing what you just said, right? So what it affects is perhaps where we invest and where we think we can help, and whether something is as good an investment as it was in a different administration. But I will say, to some extent, the issues again, the challenges are still the same. The vertical may change slightly, and it is still true that for the most part, if you can get past a lot of the government bureaucracy and you become a supplier and a vendor of government and you're doing a good job, it is a harder road for someone to crack. I do think one of the things that we do effectively is we help companies bridge that gap, both on the regulatory and just the call it BD client side. Um, and the Doge thing is interesting because there's Doge like efforts at all levels of government. Again, both Democrat and Republican side now. And so on the one hand, it does create some challenges, perhaps in terms of funding and budgets, but it also, when done right, creates more opportunity for innovation, right? So it also opens the doors for innovators to get in against established competitors, more so than may have been the case previously. And so we view that as an opportunity. And again, AI plays a role in that too, right? Because AI is upending that game as well, where a lot of the innovation is coming from private companies, sometimes smaller companies that have not played the government, in the government space before. So yeah, it's a challenge. We have to always read the tea leaves. There are things in 2021 that would have looked attractive that do not look attractive now, and vice versa. So we're always looking at that, but it doesn't change the fundamental premise.
That makes sense. So, in terms of how Govo engages with, for anybody who might be in that space, right? What would you say is the value proposition for why people should want to work with Govo specifically, apart from just the
Founders,
funding amount? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and when we tell people, like, part of our screening process and interviewing process with founders is, what else do you think you need beyond capital? Because there's lots of places you can go for capital. So two things. One is a technical one, particularly in Florida. So we actually like to lead rounds, because we feel like the companies we're investing in are in a very specific niche that we know well, and you have to be involved with the entrepreneur. And the best way to be involved with the entrepreneur is to be involved with them both on the investment side and on the business side. So, and there aren't a lot of funds that will lead in Florida at this early stage. So that's a good one because we get I get a lot of calls from people saying, yeah, I really need a lead. I got a lot of people who are willing to write a check if we could get a lead. Um, and we like to lead because again, we get to set the terms and we get to know the entrepreneurs a little bit better than if we were just following on capital. But the biggest thing is if they're on more of the regulatory side, what is the regulatory environment they're working in, and are we able to support what they're doing or help what they're doing, either just by strategic counsel or actually through support. I'll give you an example. One of our companies is a Miami-based company called Kind Designs. They 3D print environmentally friendly seawalls that actually support the regrowth of coral reefs, plant life, animal life on the shores where their seawalls are in, as opposed to just a standard slab of concrete. One of the things we were able to help them do is to change the permitting requirements in Miami-Dade County around uh, the advantages of a living seawall, in a way that has sped up the permitting process. It's eliminated the need to do some other mitigation strategies that are very expensive if you use a standard seawall. And that's, that very quickly has made a dramatic change in their business and their business development efforts in not just in Miami-Dade County, but in other areas where people have heard. It helped also just to raise awareness of them. So, there's an example where we're just at a very specific level, we're actually able to help them make a regulatory change. And on more of the, selling to government side, um, sometimes it is just a matter of our ability to, leverage our Rolodexes and people we know, or at the very least to help them understand the process, how to go about it. And it does vary to your question earlier about what level of government you're working. You're working at. State and local is different than federal in that regard. So those are I mean, I think that's a lot of the value propositions because a lot of early stage investors, um, they're not always as vertically focused, right? They may be a little more generalists, right? Early capital tends to cluster geographically, not vertically. Um, it's not absolutely true, but in some cases is. And so we in a sense kind of do both, although we do invest nationally, but we try to get to have at least pay attention to our backyard geography. Because we think Florida is a great place to invest. We think there's a lot of great innovation coming out of Florida. We're obviously big believers in I guess what's right now called this Florida story. Um, um, but so that's pretty much the approach.
Yeah, no, that's a really powerful angle if you're able to help them navigate some of the regulation permitting aspects of it and actually
Yeah,
influence
and some
things.
investors just get spooked by government, and I understand they just won't, they won't touch it. And listen, there's things we won't touch as well. Like we get a lot of about a third of our portfolio is healthcare, but none of it is our pre-FDA devices or life sciences or drugs. It's just not an area we feel we've got the right expertise to be able to help people. And so sometimes people are surprised by that. Like, wait a second, you're in the regulatory environment. You don't touch the FDA. Well, again, as investors, I think you need to know what you're really good at, what you're not, and that's just a different flavor of ice cream that we're not good at.
No, that's good to know exactly which area you want to focus on. Specifically on that front, what like you talked about AI, obviously that's the big story right now.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks we're in a bubble. We probably are in a bubble. But from your perspective, like, do you work with AI in government, or do you have any portfolio companies in that space right now, or how are you looking at that?
Yeah, we have several. It's I think first of all, I have to start from a premise that to be absolutist right now to me seems, I mean, almost arrogant because I mean, for someone to say they know exactly what's going to happen, you just can't, right? So I think you've got to be open. Obviously, you have to take some bets, right? I mean, you have to make some decisions. So you just can't sort of flip a coin. But I think you have to be sort of open to seeing the market as it evolves. One of my partners, he constantly sends me these LinkedIn articles, and I joke with him because I say, "Oh, another one who said the world has absolutely changed today." Google was dead 7 months ago, right? Remember that? Like Google was going to go away, right? Alphabet didn't know what they were doing, and search was dead, and now OpenAI is in trouble, right?
Right.
All within 6 to 7 months. So, I think you got to be careful, right? Every job is going to be disintermediated and destroyed. No, it's not going to be that bad. Like, right. And the answer is always somewhere in the middle. So for us, and look, we're a fund of a certain size as well. Like, it doesn't make any sense for us to play in some of the, really big Silicon Valley LLM types of. We have no, there's no makes no sense for us to be investing in something like an open AI.
Just
Had
real
we,
quick, Rob, on the fund size, are you able to share specifics on what fund one is and fund two is going to be in terms of how much you've raised?
yeah, we're still working on the size of fund two because we're talking about perhaps several funds over a period of time. But between the fund and some SPVs that we've launched, we're just around $20 million.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, So, so with regards to AI, I think here's what we try to do. So first of all, we try to invest in companies that we sort of fit our thesis, right? They have to be in the government space. They're at a certain stage where we feel we could help them and have influence. And in general, I think what we're looking for on the software side is do they have something that is defensible either in terms of their understanding of a very specific government niche and expertise, and which gives them the ability to get to market very quickly and get market penetration, which even if at a later stage a bigger entity wants to enter that space, maybe they feel it's entered, a buy versus build may be better if there's some market traction. So I think market traction is really important. Or there is some proprietary tech in terms of maybe it's a small language model or some data assets that they have. So those are the things that we're really looking for. We have found three or four in that space that we're very excited about. There's a Jacksonville company called Vox EQ, which is leveraging Carnegie Mellon technology and IP in the area of voice analytics, real time voice analytics, where you don't need a voice print to help I more quickly identify potential identity fraud and identity theft with banks and credit unions. And they've started to have a lot of success with some of the big call center outsourcing organizations who work with some of the big banks. And we have an investment in a company called Code Comply AI down in South Florida that's helping with the permitting and inspection process with at real estate. Their clients are on the one side governments, on the other side architects and engineers. And the company was founded by people who had run inspection firms or run construction companies, so they understand what doesn't work and what works well. We have another company we invested in called American AI Logistics, which is based Orlando guy, but actually he's based up in DC right now, who's really helping to look at streamlining government procurement, federal government procurement of commodities using AI. So it's very specific, right? They're very specific applications in areas that founders know can hopefully get to market quickly and really have an understanding of the tech, and would be hard for someone just to go on ChatGPT and use them. Again, whether that's where the marketplace goes in the next 5 to 10 years, that could very well be the case. But we think those gives us some moats. And then we've also invested in the infrastructure space. We're an investor in Relativity Networks, who you're aware of, local company here, founded by Jason Eichenholz, who was one of the co-founders of
Yep.
Luminar.
Proud to be a
Um,
co-investor in that.
hmm?
I'm proud to be a co-investor in that.
Oh, you know what? Actually, I didn't know that. That's great that you are. You and Jason are really good friends, so I should have known that.
Yep.
Realize that. So, we were involved with Jason from the very beginning. We've invested through the fund and through an SPV. So very excited about that. Very excited about that tech, both from an investment standpoint and just going back to where we started, where you and I started in this call. For the type of innovation that could come out of Orlando and come out of it's UCF technology that they're licensing. So that one I'd love to see happen, explode for a whole host of reasons, not just for Govo.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love what you said about AI tools or solutions that where the founding team has deep domain knowledge and understanding of the space, so that
Yeah.
it's not just somebody who's trying to build an AI solution on top of something that they don't, they haven't have lived experience in, but it really is about the secret sauce that they bring on how their AI is going to be different from somebody else who could try to duplicate what they do. So from that
Yeah.
perspective, like, what are some of the use cases that you're seeing that, generally that government is getting more interested in, maybe certain domains or use cases that you feel are either already being deployed, cash is being deployed, or interest is going into it, or potentially coming up in the next year or two, there is going to be more interest?
Yeah. I mean, I do find that, particularly again, this is a lot of these guys are more at the local state level. I mean, there's definitely still a lot of testing and piloting going on. I do think you've already seen a lot of governments just go sort of the low hanging fruit of chatbots and customer service agents and things like that. So I think you're definitely seeing you're definitely seeing some of that. But we are in all the companies I just mentioned, we are definitely seeing uh, governments recognize that there's opportunities for them to leverage AI to speed up some process, either to reduce costs. In the case of in the case of things like permitting, I think it's interesting because it ties back, as you know, one of my passions when I was running for mayor and even in the community here has been around affordable housing. And it's been interesting that I think you've seen across the country a lot of folks pick up on that. One of the affordable housing, there's it's one of those things that needs a lot of different solutions. Like there's no one thing other than maybe say broadly supply. But I think you hear a lot about the cost of permitting and the time of permitting and working through government red tape, the impact that has on housing. And so that's interesting. That has resonated, say for code comply, with governments around, okay, if we could do some things to streamline things that reduce costs in a way that then could bring down the cost of an apartment complex or even a commercial development at a time of inflation and a time where affordability is such an issue, that's pretty important. So we've seen that. I think that's one I'm definitely seeing. Um, but again, I think what's interesting to me is that government, because people would say, look, government's not an innovator, and in many respects they're right. But I've not seen government say, well, there's no way we're touching AI, right? Or it's the early, let's see what happens.
Well, especially with
Now
this
they're not
current
all in.
administration, they're pretty aggressively adopting AI. In fact, they're
Well, at the federal level,
yeah,
yeah.
federal level, and they're actually passing things that make it hard to put any friction in front of AI, even in the local level with certain things they're doing, right? So I think they're very much AI positive at the moment.
Yeah, there's no doubt. There's no doubt about that. And I think there'll be a question about where state regulate. I mean, one of the things we're looking at for sure is what will be federal policy versus state policy. And my guess is there probably is going to be a patchwork. But um, but in terms of government as a client, as opposed to the regulatory framework, which I do think is still a little bit murky because there are some state things that are out there. If you look at certain states like Colorado and California, where there's some things that might be a little more problematic. But compared to other technologies, what I would say we're not seeing is government just saying we're not touching this for 10 years until we figure out what's going on, right? They're not all in, but they are definitely willing to engage in conversations and look at pilots so I think they recognize the potential opportunity and the value, which is good, which is a good thing.
Right, right. So I got to ask this, of course, because nobody knows what's going to happen, but everybody has their own perspective. And your perspective as an investor, as an entrepreneur, as somebody who's helping actively mentoring entrepreneurs who are in AI, are we in a bubble right now? What do you think?
Well, to me, the bubble thing is just a matter of, that's more an investment question about when you're planning to exit something and sell it, right? Because otherwise, uh, I mean, look, some people don't survive. Some companies don't survive a bubble, so there is that piece. You know, it's a difficult question to answer because it is different. Like I live, so our company, the company I was explaining to you before, we sort of rode up and down the first .com bubble in the late 90s. We were providing fulfillment and call center and website services. And I remember we'd go into meetings with people, and they would tell us how they have the next, they're going to be $1 billion in retail in the next 3 years, and they were selling maybe imported handcrafts from all over the world, but everyone was going to buy it over the web, right? And a lot of those businesses went away. And will that happen? So if we're talking about startup world, right? Let's forget about internet. Public market bubble. You know, it's not really my necessarily my field of expertise, and I'm sure there'll be some of that at some point, right? Because the valuations are very high. And the market's a little tricky right now in terms of you have some very large, very highly valued private companies that probably are going to want to go public at some point. And so, yes, maybe there'll be a bubble. There will be some bubble there where it just has to pop because there's nowhere for it to go. On the stage that we invest, I think what we have tried to do to shield ourselves against a bubble is all the things that I talked to you about before, right? So we're trying to make investments that the valuations are, somewhat reasonable. Understand that valuations are a little bit higher, but most of what we're investing in is still what I'd call in the realm of where you'd expect a seed investment to be in terms of valuations. Um, and I think our feeling is if they have something that is somewhat defensible and they can get to market, that even if there is a bubble, they can hopefully get to the other side of it, and hopefully the on the pure investment side, the entry point upon which we came in still gives us the opportunity to generate upside, even if the valuation on the other end doesn't quite materialize. So, we'll see. I'm much more concerned about making sure the companies scale and grow, right? And
Right.
then then you deal with the macro market.
Right. Right. So you're very much a fundamentals driven investor on that front.
Well, listen, at the early stage, I think you kind of have to start there, right?
Of course.
Because these are companies that need to get more traction before any sort of exit. I mean, the big thing is you need to make sure the caveat to what I just said is you need to make sure they've got the cash runway they need,
Right.
right? So, I mean, that's the biggest issue. Can you make sure that you've got enough cash
Right.
so that
So
if
let me
there is a
so let
bubble or
me
there is a pushback, they can't, they starve because they can't get, they just can't raise capital. That's the much more pressing investment issue on our side. Unfortunately, we really haven't had to deal with that situation yet. But I mean, that worries me more than what an exit valuation, may be for some of these companies given the stage they're at.
right. So let me ask the question in those terms then, right? So when you're looking at runway now, if there is a bubble, then you want a longer runway because you don't know if you can go back and dip into the market when
Yeah.
the bubble bursts. So how are you projecting that right now for your startups? Is it like
Well,
a
I mean,
3 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year runway? What are you looking
oh
longer
well,
term
listen.
now?
I mean, I think it's very difficult to have that long a runway. So I think I think if we can comfortably be in the 18 to 24 months, because again, these are also companies that should begin to show some revenue, should be showing revenue traction as well. Otherwise, they're just not going to get to that next stage when you're talking about trying to get someone. If we're talking more about like getting someone from a seed to a Series A, so no, I think we're more in the 18 to 24 months.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Well, on a related note, but obviously you and I are working together on Rally. You co-founded it, and I'm one of the board members with you there. And of course, we are focused mostly on social enterprises, but
Yeah.
AI is something that's affecting a lot of different socioeconomic aspects of our society right now, including the future of work and jobs and everything else like that. So where do you stand there in terms of, I guess, prognostication? Like, how do you see all this kind of playing out? And do you have, like, for folks that are working on their, different domains, how should they be? I mean, you have two daughters. I have a son and a daughter. And
Yeah.
just starting from a very personal note, but then also extrapolating out, like, how do you see this AI impact on jobs and the future of work?
Yeah, I have a daughter. So one of my daughters is both my daughters graduate next year, one grad school, one undergrad. My grad school daughter, she's going to become a licensed mental health therapist. So, you know, I think she's probably good. She's probably good to go. There's still a huge supply demand difference there. Unfortunately, I guess. But my older daughter, she's a dual fashion merchandising and business major. Um, I know that her group, like her friends, like the kids who are about to graduate next year, I mean, they're worried. I mean, there's no doubt that there's some angst around that. I mean, I will tell you what I've told my daughter has been understand how your industry is using AI, right? One of the advantages you should, on the one hand, AI does seem to be having an impact on entry level positions. There's no doubt about that. On the other hand, I do think that corporations are smart enough to know that there's a long term effect to that, right? And you're gonna have to figure it out because you're not going to get to senior leadership if you don't have entry level folks that over time you could groom and mentor and watch, and right, you're gonna hollow out your workforce. So there's going to be I think there's going to be an interesting balance there that I know some people already talk about. But what I've told her is understand how AI is using your industry, leverage the fact that you're AI native compared to other folks who may be in the work industry for 10 or 15 years and haven't quite, aren't as adept in it. Um, and be really good at your soft skills, right? I mean, human interaction is still going to be will always be important. What we're doing right now is really important. Now, my guess is we could go onto AI and we could fake a podcast. I know we can actually. We could fake a podcast with two people talking that sound like they're you and I, but they're not. Um, so on a personal level, that's what I'm sharing. On the investment level, it is definitely interesting because we've had conversations with a couple of our investments where some of the ramifications of what they're doing could be job loss, and job loss in a way that they might get some pushback. Um, and I think the advice there is just I think they have to press on with their business model, and the governments and the clients will have to some extent navigate that. And I think those businesses that also articulate how they're making folks more productive and can enhance their skills, I think have a leg up. But again, this sort of goes back to what I said earlier on. I don't know. I would be foolish. I'm not an economist by background, or a workforce expert. So I think it would be presumptuous and arrogant for me to say this is exactly how it's going to happen. And I can't stand when I see people who say they do, particularly when it's like a LinkedIn post. And well, how do you know? So, I think the best thing is just keep your eyes and ears open, learn the skills you need to learn, be very adaptable. Um, and by the way, that's probably true of any young professional, right? And has always been true of them. The stakes may be different, the change may happen more quickly. But there were a lot of these conversations were had in the 90s and the 2000s with the change, with the internet, with the internet boom as well. So this will probably move faster, and probably some more things will break, and there'll be some more disruption. But I'm also an optimist enough to think that we will ultimately navigate it in the other side, right? I mean, we have as humanity has over time showed that it does have the ability to sort of navigate these changes over time as technology disrupts things. This may be a bigger disruption, a quicker disruption, but um,
Yeah, yeah. No, I always ask this question because everybody has different perspectives, and I always learn a little bit.
yeah,
There's so many pieces of information coming up, right? There's the what we call the doomsayers versus the
yeah,
utopians, right? And then
yeah,
everybody has very strong opinions on this topic, and there's reports coming out about how AI is disrupting everything, and so many jobs are going to
yeah,
be lost. And you got, on the other hand, the World Economic Forum puts out reports saying that you're going to lose whatever 2 billion jobs, but then you're going to get 2.5 or 3 billion jobs back as new jobs are created.
right,
And I just
right,
don't know where those numbers come from. So I'm always
exactly.
curious.
No, great. And MIT's put out some really great stuff. I mean, MIT seems to put out some of the best stuff that I've seen. I guess I would say I am for sure a long time more utopian. What happens to get us to that utopia may not, it's probably going to have some challenges for people. There's no doubt. Um, but I guess I'm confident we will ultimately figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. Which reminds me, I have to invite you to there's a mock trial event that we're doing with Orlando Innovation League next month, which is basically AI on trial, doomsdayers versus utopians. So I'll invite you to that. It should be a fun
Yeah.
event. But yeah, no, it is a hot topic because it has so many ramifications and everybody is impacted. Every single human is impacted. So it's one of those once in a
Yep.
generation type questions. But speaking of that, given all the uncertainties we have and given all the things we're trying to navigate just personally and professionally, do you have any advice for founders and entrepreneurs, social enterprise or government or otherwise, in terms of how they should kind of think about all of these things and position themselves better?
Well, I do think AI has to be part of your business. It doesn't need to be the core of your business, but you've got to be AI enabled at some point, right? AI's got to be part of your business, just like at some point the internet had to become part of your business, right? And we created that tech enabled word, I don't know, phrase 20 years ago or so. So, that has to happen, right? You can't have your head in the sand around where AI can make your business better, even if it's just, operational and financial productivity. So I do think it's because I will say we're not yet seeing at Rally a lot of applicants who are AI centric companies. And I don't know why that is. Because I do think AI can really be applied to some of these systemic challenges. Because a lot of them are very data driven. We did see some of them. I was encouraged that we did see several of them at Startup Weekend, where there was an AI solution that was helping improve the performance of nonprofits. There was another one which actually was tied to workforce training and development, about entrepreneurs starting businesses. So I'm hoping we see more of that. I think we're not quite seeing it. We're not quite seeing it yet, but I hope that will be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why events like that are important to kind of bring different ideas together. I think in
Yeah.
general, you're seeing the younger generation a lot more engaged with social impact solutions and problems and,
Yeah,
applying the
there's no
problems
doubt. I
to
mean, yes, I think most businesses, most so many, when I say most, so many business ideas have, whether they call themselves social impact companies or impact, there's an impact piece to what they're trying to do, even if it's just personally what they're trying to accomplish for the business and what it means for them and the impact they can make. If not actually an embedded part of their business. And I do think uh, I do expect that to continue because look, I think that people are, and you see it in people's votes and just their reviews on surveys, just how they feel about things. I do think people do feel that there are some issues and challenges that, whether it's government or business or nonprofits, have not solved. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are thinking about how they can solve that problem outside of the system, the way it currently sits. And I certainly love that. I agree with that. I want to support that in any way I can. I think that's why you and I do what we do broadly for entrepreneurs, and obviously that's definitely what we're trying to do with Rally. But I think it's an output of just this sort of general frustration that we do see around. Man, we just have to change some of these things. And again, that's a completely nonpartisan conversation because a Republican would have an answer for the things they're not happy about. The Democrat would have the answer for the things they're not happy about. But and by the way, regardless, some of those and a lot of those things are kind of the same. They just have a different way of trying to attack them, but the problem is the same one, right? So yes, I think it's a wonderful thing that entrepreneurs want to be part of that, part of that problem, part of that solution. And I'm happy to help them.
Before we wrap, any resources or that you want to share with the audience that are entrepreneurial or tech minded? And also, do you have any asks for the audience?
Yeah, well, certainly, here in Central Florida, we're lucky to have a lot of different entrepreneurial resources, whether it is the Rally program. So if you are someone, you could be a nonprofit or a for-profit, but if you are thinking about applying an entrepreneurial business model to solving an impact or a social problem, please apply to Rally. You can go to rallysca.com. If you're a tech entrepreneur, if you're sort of in operation, post revenue, and looking to scale, the UCF Business Incubator, which I'm proud to be part of, has locations throughout all the major counties in Central Florida, and you can go to UCFbusinessincubator.org, I think, and find an application there. And then I'm also, I've been involved with Starter Studio since its founding, and that's a great place for a little bit earlier stage entrepreneurs and some of their accelerator programs. And the good news is, if you reach out to any of those programs and you're not the right fit for them, they'll refer you to that resource or any of the other resources in town. And my only ask would be for just stay involved, right? If you're a business leader in the community, growing entrepreneurs and growing scalable businesses in our community, tech startups is really important to our community in a whole bunch of ways. So, whether it's some of the organizations Rajiv's involved in, I'm involved in, we're always looking for more mentors, for corporate supporters, get involved. And if you're an entrepreneur, just know you don't have to figure this out all on your own. It's lonely to be an entrepreneur. There are resources that can help you, and there are people in this community who want to help you and frankly want nothing more than just to see you succeed. So get involved.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Rob. I really appreciate you making some time for us. That was extremely informative and I'm sure enlightening for a lot of folks, especially those who are trying to use AI in government. So appreciate your time. All the best with everything that you're doing, and hopefully we continue to make some great impact for the community.
Thanks, Rajiv. Great. Thank you for everything you do for the community, and always look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, sir. Have a great
See
one.
ya.
Take care.
Bye-bye.